The microphone hit the studio floor with a sound that cut through 40 years of television experience. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of shows, weathered every imaginable surprise, but nothing had prepared him for what a 10-year-old girl in a yellow sundress was about to reveal. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer entertainment. This was the moment when a game show became something infinitely more profound. It started as Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, just another Family Feud taping. The Martinez family from Phoenix faced off against the Patterson family from Jacksonville. Standard setup, standard energy, standard Steve Harvey magic, working the crowd with that infectious smile and perfectly timed comedic beats. But in the second row of the studio audience, something was building that would shatter every protocol and redefine what television could become. 10-year-old Emma Martinez sat between her grandmother Rosa and her Aunt Sophia, wearing a bright yellow sundress that caught the studio lights like sunshine. Her small hands were folded in her lap, but there was something about her stillness that stood out in a room full of animated family members cheering and laughing. While everyone around her celebrated each correct answer, Emma kept glancing at an empty seat beside her grandmother. Just one empty chair, but it seemed to pull all her attention. During the family introductions, Emma had been quiet. When Steve knelt down to her level and asked, "And what's your name, beautiful?" she had whispered, "Emma," so softly the microphones barely caught it. Steve, always drawn to the shy ones, had lingered a moment longer than usual. There was something in her eyes, an old soul quality that reminded him of his own childhood, of carrying weights too heavy for small shoulders. "Emma, that's a pretty name. How old are you, sweetheart?" 10, she had replied, her voice gaining slight strength. 10 years old! And what do you want to be when you grow up? Emma had paused then, looking directly into Steve's eyes with an intensity that caught him off guard. "I want to help daddies come home to their little girls." The audience had let out that collective awe that always followed sweet answers from children, but something in Emma's tone made Steve look at her just a moment longer before moving on. Now 3 rounds into the game, he understood why. The Martinez family was doing well, leading by 50 points heading into the final round. Steve was in his element, cracking jokes about grandmother Rosa's surprisingly sassy answers and Uncle Miguel's tendency to overthink simple questions. The energy was exactly what producers loved, competitive but warm, filled with the kind of authentic family dynamics that made gate television. But during the 4th round, everything changed. The category was things that make you feel safe. It was Emma's turn at the podium, brought up by her teenage cousin Maria, who was old enough to compete but had gestured for Emma to take her place. The family had been reluctant, whispering concerns about putting their youngest member in the spotlight, but Emma had stood up with a determination that surprised everyone. Steve walked over to the family podium, microphone in hand, ready to work his magic with the youngest contestant of the day. "All right, Miss Emma, you ready for this?" Emma nodded, but when she looked up at Steve, he saw something that made him pause. It wasn't nervousness, it was pain, deep and adult, that no 10-year-old should carry. "Survey says, name something that makes you feel safe," Steve announced with his usual enthusiasm, but his eyes remained fixed on Emma's face. Emma stepped closer to the microphone. The studio lights seemed to dim around her as she struggled with something internal. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear but trembling. "My daddy's voice on the phone." The answer registered on the board at number 4, worth 12 points. The Martinez family celebrated, but Emma hadn't moved from the microphone. She was staring at that empty seat again, tears beginning to stream down her face. Steve's comedian instincts kicked in first. He walked over with that easy smile, ready to comfort what he assumed was just overwhelming emotions. "Hey there, Emma. You did great, sweetheart. That was a beautiful answer." But when Emma looked up at him, Steve saw something that stopped him cold. It was the same look he'd recognized during introductions, but now it was raw, unguarded, desperate. "Mr. Steve," Emma whispered, her voice so quiet the microphones barely picked it up. "Can I tell you something about my daddy?" The studio audience was still buzzing with energy from the previous answer, unaware of the intimate moment unfolding on stage. Steve glanced at the producers in the booth, then back at Emma. Every instinct told him to keep the show moving, to handle this during commercial break, to maintain the energy that made good television. Instead, he made a choice that would define not just that episode, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be human in front of cameras. Steve Harvey dropped his cards right there on the studio floor. "Stop the music," he called out to the production booth, his voice carrying across the studio with an authority that silenced everyone immediately. "Stop everything." The theme music cut out. The audience fell silent. Even the camera operator seemed to sense that something unprecedented was happening. Steve walked over to Emma and without hesitation, knelt down in front of her, his full attention focused on this 10-year-old girl who clearly had something important to say. "Emma," he said softly, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. This was just Steve Harvey, the man talking to a child who needed to be heard. "What do you want to tell me about your daddy?" The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. 200 audience members held their breath. The Patterson family, their competitors, watched with growing concern and curiosity. Even the producers in the booth had stopped barking directions into their headsets. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her small hand and looked up at Steve. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong in a way that surprised everyone who heard it. "My daddy is in jail, Mr. Steve." The words hit the studio like a physical force. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, was completely speechless. Emma continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He robbed a bank because I was sick and we didn't have money for the hospital. The doctor said I might die if I didn't get the medicine, and Daddy said he couldn't let that happen. So he went to the bank with a note and asked for money to save me." The silence in the studio was deafening. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had faced every possible situation a game show could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. "He didn't hurt nobody," Emma whispered, her small voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence. "He just gave them a note that said he needed money for his little girl's medicine, and when the police came, he didn't run. He just sat down and waited because he said he wasn't sorry for trying to save me." Behind the scenes, a producer made a decision that defied every network expectation. Keep the cameras rolling. Don't cut away. The world needed to see this. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, a simple piece of white fabric that he always kept perfectly folded. Without saying a word, he gently wiped the tears from Emma's face. "Emma," he said, his own voice now thick with emotion, "how long has your daddy been away?" 2 years, she whispered. "I got better, but Daddy can't come home yet. He ties me every Sunday at Grandma's house, and he always asks if I'm being good and if I remember that he loves me more than all the stars in the sky." Steve Harvey stood up slowly, walked to the Patterson family podium, and spoke directly to them. "I need to ask you folks something, and I need you to be honest with me. Would you mind if we stop this game right here? This little girl needs something more important than points on a board." The Patterson family patriarch, a man in his 60s who had driven 8 hours from Jacksonville to be there, didn't hesitate for even a second. "Steve, you do whatever that little girl needs." But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey walked back to Emma and did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. He pulled his cell phone from his inside jacket pocket and held it up for everyone to see. "Emma," he said, his voice now clearly audible throughout the silent studio. "What's your daddy's name?" "Roberto Martinez," Emma replied, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time all day. "And do you know what prison he's in?" "Florence Federal Prison in Arizona. Grandma Rosa knows the number." Steve turned to Grandmother Rosa, who was openly crying in the family section. "Mrs. Rosa, do you have that number?" Rosa nodded, pulling a worn piece of paper from her purse. It was clear she carried it everywhere, this lifeline to her son-in-law who had sacrificed everything for her granddaughter. "I want everyone in the studio to understand what we're about to do," Steve announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction.
"We're going to call Emma's daddy. Right here. Right now. On live television." Because sometimes a little girl needs to hear her father's voice more than she needs to win a game.
The audience erupted in applause, not the polite television applause of a typical taping, but something deeper, something that connected everyone in that studio to their own understanding of love, sacrifice, and family. Steve took the paper from Rosa and dialed the number. The prison's automated system answered, and Steve, speaking clearly and with the authority of someone accustomed to making impossible things happen, navigated through the options. When a human voice came on the line, Steve identified himself and explained the situation. "Ma'am, this is Steve Harvey from Family Feud. I have a little girl here who needs to talk to her father. I understand the protocols, but this is important. This is about healing." What happened next defied every regulation, every protocol, every rule that typically governed such institutions. The power of human compassion, combined with Steve Harvey's genuine sincerity, moved mountains. "Hold on, Mr. Harvey. Let me see what I can do." The studio waited in absolute silence. Emma stood beside Steve, clutching his free hand, her entire body trembling with anticipation. Seconds felt like hours. Then a voice came through the phone speaker, confused but hopeful. "Hello, this is Roberto Martinez." Emma's composure shattered completely. "Daddy," she cried, her voice breaking with 2 years of stored-up longing. "Emma? Mi niña? How are you calling me? Is everything okay?" Steve held the phone between himself and Emma, his arm around her small shoulders as she sobbed with relief. "Daddy, I'm on TV. I'm on the Steve Harvey show, and I told him about you and he called you for me." "You're on television? My brave little girl is on television?" "Yes, Daddy. And I told everyone how you saved me, how you made sure I got better even though it meant you had to go away." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of a grown man crying. Not just Roberto, but men throughout the studio audience, fathers who understood exactly what this man had sacrificed.
"Emma, mi amor, are you being good? Are you remembering everything Daddy taught you?"
"Yes, Daddy, I remember. I remember you love me more than all the stars in the sky." "That's right, baby girl, and do you know what else?" "What, Daddy?" "I would do it again, 100 times, 1,000 times, because you are my everything, and a daddy's job is to protect his little girl, no matter what." Steve Harvey, who had made America laugh for decades, who had maintained composure through every unexpected moment television could create, found himself openly weeping. This wasn't about entertainment anymore. This was about the purest form of love, the kind that transcends law, transcends judgment, transcends everything except the bond between a father and his child. "Mr. Martinez," Steve said, taking control of the phone for a moment. "This is Steve Harvey. I want you to know something, sir. You have raised an incredible daughter. She stood up here today and defended you with the kind of loyalty and love that most adults never achieve. You should be proud. Mr. Harvey, I can't thank you enough for this, for letting me hear her voice, for letting her know I'm still here. Mr. Martinez, I need to ask you something. When do you come home? I have 18 months left on my sentence, sir." Steve looked down at Emma, then back at the phone. "Well, sir, I can't change the legal system, but I can promise you this. Your daughter is going to be taken care of. And when you come home, you're going to find a little girl who never stopped believing in her hero." What happened next transforms the entire studio. Steve turned to address everyone present, his voice strong and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we witness something more powerful than any game. We witness love. We witness sacrifice. We witness what happens when a father chooses his child's life over his own freedom. Roberto Martinez isn't a criminal. He's a father who was faced with an impossible choice and chose love." The standing ovation that followed wasn't polite or prompted. It was organic, emotional, and overwhelming. 200 people rose to their feet to honor a man they'd never met. A father sitting in a prison cell who had just reminded them all what unconditional love looked like. But Steve wasn't finished. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, his lucky jacket that had been with him through thousands of shows. He wrapped it gently around Emma's small shoulders. "Emma, I want you to keep this jacket. And every time you miss your daddy, every time you feel scared or alone, I want you to put this on and remember today. Remember that your daddy's love is so strong, it reached through prison walls and television cameras to find you. Steve held the phone close to Emma one more time. Daddy, I have to go now, but I love you. I love you too, mi niña, more than all the stars in the sky. Be good for Grandma Rosa, and remember Daddy is coming home. As the call ended, Emma looked up at Steve with eyes that no longer held pain, but hope. Thank you, Mr. Steve. Thank you for letting me talk to my hero. Your hero? Steve asked. My daddy. He's my hero because he saved my life. The episode aired 6 weeks later, exactly as it happened, with no editing to remove Steve's unprecedented decision to top the show. The response was unlike anything in television history. The show received over 500,000 letters, emails, and social media messages from viewers sharing their own stories of parental sacrifice, of love that transcends circumstance, of fathers who would do anything for their children. More importantly, the episode sparked a national conversation about the justice system, about medical costs, about the impossible choices facing American families. Roberto Martinez became a symbol of paternal love pushed to extremes, and Emma became the face of childhood resilience. 3 months after the episode aired, Roberto Martinez was granted early release due to the overwhelming public support and the intervention of lawyers who offered their services pro bono. The reunion between Emma and her father was broadcast live on Steve Harvey's talk show, watched by 15 million viewers who had followed their story. Roberto, now working as a community advocate helping families navigate medical crises, often speaks about that day when Steve Harvey stopped a television show to reconnect a father with his daughter. He didn't just give Emma a phone call, Roberto says. He gave us both hope when we had lost everything else. Emma, now 12 and healthy, still wears Steve's jacket to every important event in her life. She has it tailored as she grows, but she refuses to replace it. This jacket reminds me that love is stronger than walls, she says, and that sometimes when you least expect it, someone will stop everything just to help you find your way home. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every contestant, every moment he spends in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the most important moments in television aren't scripted. They're the moments when human beings recognize each other's pain and choose to respond with compassion. The jacket that Steve gave Emma became more than a garment. It became a symbol of the moment when entertainment became ministry, when a game show host became a bridge between a father's love and a daughter's heart. And in a world that often feels divided by judgment and circumstance, it proved that love really can transcend any barrier, even prison walls. Because sometimes, stopping everything for a 10-year-old girl isn't just good television, it's good humanity, and that's a lesson worth more than any prize a game show could ever offer.